Okay, we are live. Three, two, one.
This is Literary Roadhouse, one short story once a week. I'm Kenechi.
I'm Maya.
I'm Gerald.
I'm Anais.
Sorry, I don't have the right script. I don't have the right script because that
Okay.
doesn't say. Oh wait,
After I'm Kenechi,
yeah,
just
yeah,
say on today's show we're discussing.
yeah.
It's okay.
Sorry.
It's the first time you've done this one. All of us have already done it, so now it's your turn to laugh for us to laugh at you because you laughed at me that first time. You laughed at me last week. Okay, 3, 2, 1.
This is Literary Roadhouse, one short story once a week. I'm Kenechi.
I'm Maya.
I'm Gerald.
I'm Anais.
On today's show, we are discussing The Laughing Man by JD Salinger.
Woohoo! First, before we get started, I wanted to let everybody know that Literary Roadhouse is rated PG for saucy language. Occasionally, we may accidentally produce a clean podcast, and in those situations, we will label it on iTunes as clean.
But not often.
How's everybody doing?
Good, thank you.
Good.
So, how do we want to start this thing? JD Salinger. It's my first JD Salinger. I've never read JD Salinger. I attempted to read Catcher in the Rye in middle school, and I got a third of the way through and just closed it and gave up and went back to Shakespeare. So this was interesting for me. I'd never actually read him. I went into it not expecting to like him at all, and I had a very interesting experience. So tell me, what did you all think?
I can go first. Yeah, I've actually read this story before. I read it a long time ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. But this time it was I kind of vaguely had an idea of the storyline, although I didn't really remember the specifics. But I enjoyed it. I thought it was good. I like the aspect of the story within a story, and I like how, as the chief is telling them a story, it's like saying just telling us a story of the chief telling them a story. And it's interesting because even within that, it's like the chief has his own story going on with Mary Hudson, and the boys paying attention to that story. So there's so many different levels to it, and I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I thought when I first like Maya, I've never read any Salinger before, and I started reading it. I thought, yeah, is this really literary? But then as you go through it, you start to realise, as Kenechi says, the layers that lie underneath the story. And I like the fact it was sort of semi-contemporary and outwardly quite a straightforward little story.
Is this literary? You snob, you. How about you, Anais?
I really, really enjoyed the story, and I think for this podcast, this hits 2 new first categories for us. This is the first one that I felt was predominantly humorous. It was really funny. I had a lot of laugh out loud moments. And like Kenechi was saying, this is the first one that has the classic frame story, which is that story within a story we were talking about. And just in case we have listeners who want to hear the discussion without reading the story first and have no idea what happened. So basically the story follows a boy who's 9 years old. It's kind of like a Boy Scouts, but it's not the Boy Scouts. It's a little tribe that they made up themselves. There's this law student in his 20s who takes them every day pretty much to go play sports, and he's telling them a story of the Laughing Man, who is this really villainous hero who goes around burglarizing people, keeping murders to a minimum, but it happens. And it basically follows his adventure as he crosses the Chinese-Paris border, the famous Chinese-Paris border.
Which I loved.
Hilarious. Cutting on the shore of landlocked Tibet, of course. And as that story is happening, the chief also meets this woman, and I think it's pretty obvious to any adult reader that he dates her. He doesn't tell the 9-year-olds his trials and tribulations in dating, but you catch glimpses of that. And the story ends with the Laughing Man. I guess full spoilers. Ends with him dying,
Dead.
shot through the heart. Yeah.
Oh, lots of innocence.
Yeah.
How did I feel about the story? Like I said, I went into it not expecting to like it. Full on, like a lot of times when JD Salinger has been so blown up in the human conscious. Like so many like famous people have like quoted him as being a huge influence. Murderers have his book in their back pockets. I'm like, okay, this book is probably, this writer's probably not all that great. And so I went into it with that kind of mindset, and I came out of it recognizing him being a shift in literature. Like his voice felt very modern. The way he approached language was really, really clean. I guess that's the benefit of spending decades on a story. And so like I I came away really admiring his use of language. I came away having enjoyed the story, but it didn't stick with me. Like the story left me fairly soon after reading it. The children's voices was right on. Like I write a lot of short stories with children, and I loved his children's voices. I loved how honest they were and how observant they were, even when they weren't understanding everything that was going on. I found that really interesting and very true to life. But there was something about the story that it just didn't stick with me very long after reading it. And that, to me, is important in a short story. I want it to kind of niggle at my middle. So, should we get deeper?
Yeah, I think like you, I think I liked the way he dealt with the children. I liked not just the voice of the children, but also the actions of the children. It's just like a group of kids, being picked up and being taken to a ball game or whatever was being played.
Yeah, he was like after school camp or something, right?
Yeah, it was something like that. And so I like that. There was no doubt that technically it was a very strongly written story. But I think, yeah, a bit like you, it although it had depths, it wasn't that deep. There didn't seem to be. It didn't seem to. Yeah, I'm trying to find some way of explaining it. You don't sort of step back from it and then think, how does that affect me? It doesn't stay, as you say. You said it right. It doesn't stay with you. It's a story. You start it, you end it. You enjoy it. You recognise the layers, and then that's it.
What do you guys think the main point of the story is? Like, I feel like I got it, but I had to think about it. Like, it was so under the current that I couldn't really touch on it. What do you guys think about, like, the theme or the message of the story? And Anais, you are going to need to turn your mic up a little bit. It is too low still.
It's too low. Yeah. I think this is one of those stories where I don't know that he has a really huge... I didn't pick up on the sort of like, this is the message, open your eyes, like some of the other... It's funny, hearing you guys talk about how this affected you, it's like the inverse of Monroe for me, where it's like, I get why you're good at this, I get why you're celebrated, but this story isn't staying with me. And I think, like what we do... In that story also, there wasn't really a point. It was more like it was capturing a time, a perspective. And this one really for me was about the parallel between the narrative he's telling us about the Comanche tribe, that's the name of the kids' tribe, and the chief, the law student. There was a parallel between what's happening in the chief's life and the Laughing Man. The chief and the Laughing Man parallel each other pretty accurately throughout the story, right? Because both of them are like a paternal figure to the kids. The chief very literally taking them, playing sports, telling them stories, and the Laughing Man in their fantasies, which I thought was great, where they're like pretending that they're the Laughing Man's descendants. Each one of them is the last descendant, all 25 of them in their own mind. And then the first time you see a woman in the Laughing Man story, the next thing, here's a portrait of Mary Hudson in the bus. And then when the Laughing Man gets shot up, there's trouble in the relationship between the chief and Mary Hudson, right? So there was those. So I think it was more just like a kind of a mastery of that craft, and maybe talking about how storytellers draw from their experiences and sort of shroud it in all of this fantasy. And that was pretty much all I could really. I think it was a story about storytelling in many ways.
How about you guys?
I think my interpretation of it was that it's about the masks that people wear or the masks that situations have and how you're not necessarily meant to see beneath that mask. Because you have the laughing man whose face was disfigured and he wears a literal mask, but then there's like, with each layer of the story, there's like a different mask being worn. So like, for example, there's the boys, then there's a chief, and there's the world that he has, and there's the world that he shows them, like the stories he tells them, but then obviously he has this relationship with Mary Hudson that he doesn't tell them about, and they're trying to see through that mask, but they can't see it. And then I think there's also a level where the boys can't really understand the female, because I think when she first comes, she does something, I can't remember exactly what it was, but none of them really understood exactly what was going on.
Yeah, it was
kind of like,
cute.
yeah, so there's like this massive distinction between male and female, and that was like another layer. And then I think even at the end of the story, the way the story ends, without really ever telling us anything explicitly about what actually happened, is kind of like another layer between us, the reader, and, you know, Salinger telling the story. So it's like, I think, especially with how the story ends within The Laughing Man, how when he takes his mask off and then the girl sees it and she faints, and then the Farge doesn't see it, and then he manages to I think he killed him or something like that. And I think that's kind of like the message that, you know, sometimes you're not necessarily meant to see into that world, you know, that world that you don't really understand. So that's kind of what I took away from it.
How about you, Gerald?
Nope, didn't get that at all. I don't. It's kind of strange, isn't it? It's.
I love how we all get different things from these stories.
Yeah, and it's listening back to some of the other podcasts. It's great to see how we differ, you know, how we sort of differ in the way we read and what we get from the stories. But no, I didn't. For me, it had no real theme. And I know what Kenechi just said about the masks and the hiding behind them and not meant to see behind them. But I don't know, I didn't really feel that, and I don't know why. Maybe it's just me and the way I read it, I don't know, but it was just, you know, it was a frame story, and that was it. Sorry, I'm not.
No. Honestly, I'm sitting here. I'm thinking, wow, I read it kind of simplistically. When I was done reading it, I kind of felt like you, Gerald. I thought, okay, what was the point? And then I sat down and I started thinking about it. Went through it a second time, and what I came away was it's a story about loss of innocence. The way children relate to story and the way they put themselves in story and just enjoy story full on is very childlike, and slowly through the introduction of a woman, because, you know, all loss of innocence comes from women, you know, original sin and all. At her introduction, you know, they went from this innocent all boy playing environment, which most children play in pretty gender exclusive ways until a certain age, and they went from that to first being weary of this woman and then embracing her, and then they got bit by her and they lost their innocence. And at their loss of innocence, you lost the Laughing Man's life, which was the embodiment of their ability to fully live in story. And so I saw this very much as a story about loss of innocence. But that didn't come to me easily. I had to sit down and get all intellectual about it. When I first read it at the end, I was kind of like, okay. And there were points as I was reading where I was thinking, this writing is beautiful. Why am I not enjoying this story? Literally, that thought went through my head.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm getting the loss of innocence thing, because I mean, they weren't really too bothered by the woman. At first, they were just like, oh, who is this girl stepping in on our baseball? But then as soon as she went up to bat and she was good at it, they were like, yeah, go up to bat all the time. They never really, and when she was gone, only the chief cared. I never got a sense that the kids cared that she was gone. They were like, okay, well, let's get back in the bus and you finish the story for us of the Laughing Man. They went right back to story time. You know,
but you know what? When I saw that, the way I saw her introduction, you know, when she first was introduced and the boys were weary, they weren't against her because they didn't have any experience of her. They weren't like, we hate you. Whoa. Something just banged in my apartment. Sorry. They weren't, like I was saying, they weren't like, we don't want you around, we don't like you, because it was their first experience of quote unquote woman. And then when she was able to integrate herself into the game, they accepted her. But at the end, when there was problems in the relationship, the boy wasn't getting it. He kept wanting to bring her into the game to the point where she was like, leave me alone. So he got bit by the snake. And then the adults have their argument. She goes off, and they're in the bus, and the laughing man is what they use to try to recapture their innocence, but that doesn't work because then the laughing man dies. Like, that's how I read that. Kind of like Adam isn't going to be like, ooh, wow, Eve, such a bitch or whatever, because he doesn't know until after the apple and the snake. At first it's like, woohoo, Eve, So I kind of feel like that was kind of in the story a little bit, but it was really subtle. Maybe too subtle for my modern taste.
I don't agree with that, because the reason why is because one thing that really stuck out to me about the story, particularly the Laughing Man story, was how violent it was. Like, it was really, really violent. And so, I feel like if he was trying to make that their innocence, why was it so gruesome and so violent? Because even the story of how he became the Laughing Man, about his head getting put in a vice and being, twisted so it becomes an oval, like, that's gruesome. That's not.
But they're little boys. Have you seen little boys' sweet, innocent little games? They're little monsters. They're all about blood and guts and guns and swords, and yeah, it's little boys.
Severus.
In line with what Kenechi's saying, though, yeah. I mean, I totally got that. Like, his head's now shaped like a bald pecan. He doesn't have a mouth or a nose anymore. Like, it's like next level gruesome. But that's really not what bugs me the most about The Laughing Man as a children's story. It's the fact that he's a true villain. He's not like a Robin Hood. It's not like, oh, he's committing crimes for, justice. No, he's just bad. There's no redeeming quality here. And I'm like, that's odd. Like, normally children's stories, there's got to be some, like, moral to it, and there wasn't with The Laughing Man.
Yeah, he did kill his captors, didn't he?
Yes, no, but he did have good sight, because he was like, he was like, loyal, and he was the best of the murderers, the best of the bandits. I'm sorry, but having raised a little boy and having tried to raise him to be all sweet and loving, and then watched him turn Legos into pistols, he would have loved this story. Like, I can't think of a little boy, a 9-year-old little boy, that would have been all like, "Read, tell me more, tell me more." It was so funny. I love that part of the story.
Yeah, and that was part of the humour, wasn't it? The fact that the boy's story in itself was very well written, and that's all they wanted. They just wanted to play games. They're not interested. Like Maya said, there's this girl appears, and they just don't know what it is. It's, what are you doing?
What is this thing? Female.
And I think there was some fear on their part that it would change things. They had this great thing going, and she would sort of mess things up, because they, it wasn't just a boy with long hair or something. They recognised what it was, and so I think there was some I know.
What it was.
I'm thinking like a little boy now. It's just, where's she gone? Come back. I don't know. Sorry.
So if the story was written so well, the Laughing Man story itself was written so well, and the boys were just so goofy, why is it the story didn't stick with us?
I don't know. It was something like reading it, and I read it through twice, and I sort of, at no time did I think, "Ooh, here's a deep bit," or "Here's an interesting bit," or I didn't pause and think, "Oh, what's the writer trying to tell me now?" It was just, I get the parallel story, the parallelism between the boys and in their tribe and the Laughing Man, but I don't know, didn't do it for me, I'm afraid.
Any ideas, Anais?
I mean, I like the insights into how it is to see these sort of things from the perspective of a child. I really like, for example, when he's talking about how the narrator's a descendant of the Laughing Man and nobody knows and he's just biding his time, and he makes things like brushing his teeth and going to school subversive. Like, I'm not doing this because I'm behaving. I'm doing this as part of my incognito disguise as this bandit, you know? I remember that from my own childhood, like turning things into like, oh yeah, I'm so tough while you're like brushing your teeth. The acceptance of the China-Paris border, which made me laugh so hard because
yes.
Well, yeah, but it's because I had that when I was a kid. My parents took me to Chinatown in Manhattan. I truly thought we had gone to China. I remember putting on this like reverent, poised air. Like that's what I assumed you have to do when you go to a foreign country. I'm in Chinatown in Manhattan, so I had a China-New York border. So I totally
Totally. It reminded me of when I was little. I had this book I was obsessed with. It was this book about gypsies that lived in the woods, and this girl was really like a descendant, and she was like a seventh daughter of a seventh daughter, and she had like all these magical things that she had to like discover. And I remember like in my mind like going into the woods, and I was like in the gypsy woods and doing that kind of thing when I was little. And I felt like that part of the story was captured really, really well, but it wasn't captured in a way that, like, it was captured in a way that felt real, but not in a way that really stuck with me or left a lasting impression. It was a story I enjoyed, but not a story that I loved.
Yeah, this I think we all sort of recognised in the children, like Anais said, that recognised things that we did and little plays that we put on for ourselves and little characters that we assumed, and you were always somebody else. You were always playing this role of somebody else, and that came across really well. It was very, very well written. Really enjoyed it as a story. It just didn't move me.
How about you, Kenechi? You're pretty quiet over there.
No,
Since you've read it before, I'm just wondering, did you find you enjoyed it more this time?
No, I don't think so. I think what you guys are saying does have a point because I have read it before, but it was a few years ago, but I couldn't really remember exactly what happened in the story. I remember it was about, the boys and the guy telling them a story, but I can't remember how it ended. I couldn't remember, like, the specifics of it. But I mean, as a story, it's like, I feel like it was kind of like, I think it was last week's story, where it was more of a snapshot than an actual story, because within the story, I suppose not that much actually happens, but then there is a lot left to the imagination. Like, for example, with the chief and the girl, like, we don't really know what happened with them. I mean, I'm kind of assuming maybe she got pregnant or something like that, I don't know. But like, there's a lot left to the imagination. But I did enjoy it, and I don't know, I guess it didn't stick with me long term because I couldn't remember what it was about exactly.
You know what I enjoyed about the story? I enjoyed the use of language in the story. I've watched a couple documentaries on Salinger. He was really obsessed. He rewrote stories just obsessively for years before he would try to get them published. And I feel like the story was very clean, was very simple. The language was beautiful, but very fresh. It felt very fresh for being an old story. I feel like, it was right on that line between classical sounding literature and modern sounding literature. Like he was catching something that was hitting my modern ear in a really pleasant way. There was a musicality to it that I enjoyed. And so while I was reading the story, even though the story itself wasn't catching me, I was constantly stopping and saying, wow, that's beautiful. Wow, that's amazing. Wow, I need to learn how to do that. Which I wonder if being a writer is reducing my enjoyment of the story. or if being a writer is making it so I can enjoy a story that I normally wouldn't enjoy. Because obviously being a writer is changing the way I'm reading the story if those are the thoughts that are going through my head as I'm reading it, rather than thoughts of the children and the laughing man and actually feeling like I'm part of the story.
Or is it because that you're doing this podcast and therefore you are analysing the story a little bit deeper than you would do?
But I do that anyway. I'm a nerd.
Okay. Okay.
What do you guys think was the story between the Chief and Mary Hudson?
Well, first, Anais, you do need to turn yourself up because you started to say something and we didn't hear you. That's why we talked over the top of you. As far as the story between him and Miss Hudson, I felt like they were dating and they broke up like any couple of young kids, you know. They're, early 20s. I didn't think it was anything major. I feel like as a child, when you watch adults have relationships and they don't give you information, you tend to try to figure it out and blow it up to be a lot more than it is. And so I felt like that's what we were seeing, was what a relationship would look like from the outside.
I don't know. I think as children, just remembering a long way back now, but I didn't really.
Was it the caveman days?
Yeah, way before that. Woman. Caveman days. No, the only interaction with adults I seem to remember was the sort of face-to-face interaction. When they were out of my sight, they weren't in my mind at all. So I didn't think, what's their story, what's their background, why are they here, what are they doing? That's what's he saying to me, what's she saying to me, and they've gone, and I don't need to think about them anymore. So I don't know whether the children would actually be sort of interested, other than seeing it affect how he was telling them the story, the laughing ones. I think.
Yeah. And I wonder if they caught on to any of those parallels, because this reminded me of a 2008 movie called The Fall, directed by Tarsem Singh. It's strikingly similar because it's the same story within a story. It's a guy in his 20s telling a child in which he's cast himself as a bandit and has a colorful cast of mostly male characters, and the one female character kind of has a parallel to a real life woman who has left them heartbroken. So I'm like, this is really similar. And then
it may have been an influence.
It may have been an influence, yeah. And I tried to look it up, and I didn't, after a quick sort of 10-minute search, find any direct influence, but it may have been. But in that story, the girl kind of is innocent. She doesn't realize that there's a parallel between these two lives, even though the way that the movie is shot is because he's telling her the story, you're seeing it as it is in her imagination. And you start to notice certain things that she's seeing in her surroundings that she embeds in the story that he didn't necessarily place there. So that's really cool. But then she doesn't notice that he's cast himself in the role up until, spoiler if you're going to watch this movie, but if you're going to watch The Fall, spoiler alert, he attempts to commit suicide. And I think that's when she kind of realizes that, he's this guy in the story, and tries to save him in real life by inserting herself in the story and saving him in the story. So it kind of took it to the next step. This is a short story. It doesn't have that kind of full narrative. But I wonder if the kids, because they started crying, like they were shaking when the laughing man died. Is it just about the laughing man, or is it because they've noticed a change in the chief? I don't think it's that they feel like this woman, I don't think they care too much about the woman, but I wonder if they just feel like the chief's really different and upset now, and now I'm upset.
I think it is an end of an era. The chief is no longer the man who they thought he was. He could be mean to them. He could be not all-knowing, not all perfect. And the laughing man died, and, to them that was like their dream dad or whatever. I felt like like the ending is what cemented the idea that it was about loss of innocence. The way the kids reacted to the end of the story and to the change in the chief was dramatic enough. I was like, okay, the point of the story is in here. I just got to find it. But I don't think that was done just because, Mary was gone. They didn't really care about Mary that much. They liked her. They liked that she could freaking hit a ball and run, and they liked how the chief was smiley when she was around. But at her loss, it really was about the loss of what they had as a group of 25 boys being led by a man who they admired,
Yeah. But I think going back to what Gerald was saying is I think he was saying maybe when you're trying to read for a discussion, for a podcast, that you might be reading it differently, that we're reading it casually. I think that might be true, because I think what I'm hearing is us trying to be like, okay, what's the takeaway? What's the morale at the end of the story? Well, for me, I loved it just because I was entertained from beginning to end. I never looked at the scroll bar.
But at the same time, there's whole books on commentary on this story, which I don't necessarily get. I don't get that. Like, if you look up this story and you type in commentary into Google, there's whole threads in Goodreads about the meaning of this story. There's like 2 different published books on analyzing and reading the story. Like, you've got a book on how to read a story that's longer than the story. So obviously there's something there that I'm not getting. I don't get that.
I think I noticed a few things in the story, and as I was reading it, I was thinking, why did he put this there? And then the fact that you said that he rewrites stories over and over and over again, it means like those things must be there for a specific reason. And so an example is with the final installment of the story, he ends up losing his seat and being in the middle of the bus. And I'm thinking, like, why did he do that? But I didn't really have an answer for that. And also, even with the reason I thought that the girl might have been pregnant was because the first time he saw her upset, she was standing in between baby carriages. And I just thought, why is she standing in between baby carriages, And it's interesting to see that if he rewrites stuff, he put that specifically there for a reason. And so, I don't know, I think that's probably why there's so much commentary on the story, because not just those 2 things, but throughout the story, there's little things that don't really add anything to the story, but they're so specific that they make you wonder, well, why did he put that there, And it might just be for description, but it might be something else.
Yeah, I totally, when they said about the 2 baby carriages, I actually had a similar thought, only for me, it was, instead of her being pregnant, that they must have had a disagreement over their future. Like, she wanted to get married and have a family, and he didn't, or whatever. But I felt like there's symbolism there, because it was, again, so specific that it gave me pause. I think I probably do need to read the story again to understand it better. I feel like this is something that, I feel like there's something about the story that I'm missing, is what I feel like. And I think I would feel like that anyway.
But I think that's the point, though. I think that's the kind of the point of the story, because as the narrator's telling the story, he says about the chief and Mary Hudson that he wouldn't really understand until later, but even then, it was only intuition. So I feel like that line there is about us, the reader, as well, that there's something going on in the story that we don't really understand, but we kind of had this vague feeling about what it is.
That's interesting, Kenechi. So what you're saying is that what I'm feeling may actually be mirroring what the boy would have felt in the story, and that it was a deliberate crafting of my emotions. Now I feel manipulated. But yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Wow.
Reading this kind of felt to me like watching Donnie Darko. I don't know if you've seen that film. But
yes.
You watch it and it's just kind of like, there's so much going on here that I don't know what's going on. I know something's going on. So it's like, this story is kind of the same thing. Like, you don't really know what's happening, but you just know for a fact that something's happening that you can't really understand.
Yeah.
Totally.
And in line with Kenechi, sort of like, why is that line there? So I also noticed that in the Laughing Man story, part of Laughing Man's posse is a beautiful Eurasian woman who loves Laughing Man, but Laughing Man doesn't love her, which seems like the inverse, because the chief has like a kind of Polish sounding name. His real name's John like Grodowski or something. He lives in Staten Island. And it seems like he's got unrequited love for Mary Hudson. Like, it seems like that's what's going on, right? Because she stands him up and he tries to convince her to get back together. So I thought that flip had to be done on purpose because it's just kind of too perfect. But I didn't know what to make of it. Kind of like what you're saying. Like, okay, I see it's there, but now what? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny, I was just looking back at my notes and what you had said about, the story being so gruesome and even how he got disfigured being so gruesome. And when I read that, it reminded me of several years ago, there was this online conversation about this poor guy that lived in Ann Arbor. I don't know if he actually lived there or if it was just like an urban legend who had tried to commit suicide and he was left with a gaping hole in his face. And there was like all these people that lived in and around Ann Arbor talking about, have you seen him? I've seen him. It was like this horrible, like almost game about this guy who's disfigured. And there was like this gruesome, like, interest in him and trying to figure out who he was. And it was like maybe 6 years ago. And I saw a parallel between like the obsession of wanting to know all about him, even though it's like, really just disfiguring or whatever. And it kind of made me think like maybe the guy didn't really exist. Maybe it really was just like an urban legend. Maybe it was like the modern day Laughing Man living around the University of Ann Arbor. Okay. Any last?
I just wonder if a writer puts things into a story that don't seem to make sense. I'm just wondering if these things can then become too subtle that you can't even afterwards think, that was put there because of that, and you sort of follow the clues. If she was standing between baby carriages for a reason, there was no other clue there.
I think it can be too subtle. I also think that reading habits have changed. I think we don't read nearly as deeply as we used to. Even the way I read compared to the way my children are taught to read is very different. And I know that my mother was reading stories in 3rd grade that I didn't read until middle school or high school. So I do think not only the type of reading, but how we are reading as a society is changing. And so when we read older stories, I think a lot of people aren't able to pick up on the subtleties, myself included, until they go back and reread it, whereas they would have been taught that earlier.
I totally agree with you. I think that's like a reflection of society at large as well, because like in today's world, like, we have technology, and like I struggle with this myself. Like when I was younger, much younger, if I had a question, I would really sit down and think about it and try and come to the answer myself. Now I just type it into Google and the answer's there. So it's like as a society, we want everything just immediately. We don't want to like stop and look deeper and take time to actually go over it. And I think historically as well, if you went out and physically bought a book, it's like, even before text messaging, how much did we actually read? We only read when we were at school or if we're reading a book. But now with text messaging and emails and everything, we're just reading all the time. So we're kind of used to just reading fast, not really reading in depth. So I think it has changed us.
I can say, as someone who used to read a lot, at one point I was reading like a book a day. I did not grow up watching a lot of TV. It just wasn't something I did. And then within a 10-year period, I went from reading so much and reading really difficult, complicated stuff to not reading pretty much at all unless it was like an assignment for school. And my reading level, and when I say level, I'm talking about, there's a great book called How to Read a Book, and he breaks reading into levels as far as how deeply you're able to read, and the deepest level being able to read multiple books and make connections and engage in the great conversation of literature, whereas at the first level, being able to just read it and get a story. And I felt like within 10 years, I like dropped like so many levels, and being able to regain that ability to read more deeply is much harder now than it was when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I was reading Shakespeare. When I was a kid, I was reading Tolstoy, and I was getting really deep themes and understandings out of those books that now I have to work to get to. And I think a lot of that's just the influence of TV and the computer and just loss of the ability to concentrate. And so if I can see that in my own life within just a few years, like a society as a whole, I can definitely see it. You know, Alice in Wonderland was a children's story. Have you read it? It's not an easy read. A lot of like high schoolers would have a hard time getting through Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah, and I would add to that, there's definitely that element, and the other element I think is also the nature of the author, because Salinger is famously shy, famously reclusive, and I think it's in his writing as well. Like he has this idea, and then he just keeps shrouding it and shrouding it and shrouding it until you're like, I no longer know what's beneath all these layers. And I think he does it on purpose, because I think he's very shy and he's almost afraid to just be blunt with it. Because I think there's other writers, even his contemporaries or older, who are a little bit more, you know, this is it. Like, I'm not saying that there's nothing, like there's definitely layers to Dickens, but Dickens also will tell you the point of the story. Like he will get to the end of it and he laid it out for you. Where I feel like Salinger's a little bit more like timid when it comes to that. And when you were saying the whole thing about there's entire books analyzing his short stories, I think when an author writes a lot of stuff, there's like people who become experts in them, who then because they've read all his other stuff, they have all this information that when they read a story, they're like, oh, I remember baby carriages. You did that in the other short story.
But how much did he actually write? Like, seriously, most of his writing has never been published. He wrote a handful of short stories that was published in the New York Times, and then Catcher in the Rye. And then he got famous, and he freaked out and disappeared into the town in Maine. And he hasn't published anything. And so when you say, like, they read all this stuff, there wasn't that much stuff. There was a few short stories and The Catcher in the Rye. And I think because he spent so much time editing and perfecting each story, I think there is a propensity to read his stuff and go, well, there's something I'm missing, and then try to dissect it. I think that's probably where the books trying to analyze the story comes from. I think it's interesting that you say that his story feels shy. I hadn't put my finger on that, but now that you say it, I can see that. For me, it wasn't shyness, though. For me, it was the dude spent too much time literally going sent word by word, to the point that he lost like the big picture. Like that's what I got. And I admire that level of editing, but I wanted to have the point of the story be a little bit more explicit. And I feel kind of silly saying that. Like, I'm not like, you know, a shallow girl. I like stories that are open-ended. I like stories that, you know, I have to dig for meaning, but I felt like, you know, you have to dig so far. Eventually, you just don't really see that much meaning in it.
Yeah, but I still think, even if you've read just 5 of his stories, because I think he's also a very thematic author in that he tends to write a lot about children. He tends to write about a lot of the same things over and over. So even if you had just 5 stories, you could be like, oh, this again. You know who that reminds me of? Because I've read a lot of, like, Murakami's books, and after a while you're like, talking cats again. Like, you start to see, you know, like the same, like there's certain things the author puts in everything, and then you start to know, like, oh, this means this. Like it's almost like a shorthand for what they're doing, because you've already learned how they think a little bit.
It's like Stephen King and his abusive alcoholic dads, you know. Every author has their tick. Every author has their tick. Like, if I go through everything I've written, water, there is a metaphor of water in every single thing I've ever written, probably going back to, like, kindergarten. Like, you know, there's, like, a mental tick, and to the point where I almost have to search it out and delete it because it just gets to be obnoxious. So I totally get what you mean on that. Should we look at the next story? Does anyone have anything else they want to say about this one?
Well, I just have in my notes one giant question, just one big question mark to see if any of you have an answer. So why is the character called the Laughing Man? Why is it Laughing Man?
Because his mouth is gaping. Like, isn't that right? His mouth is gaping, and it goes in and out when he's breathing.
I mean, I was a little like, like
it's kind of like, why is the Joker called the Joker? He's not making any jokes. He just has a really funky face that looks like he's constantly laughing. I think it's kind of the similar thing for the Laughing Man.
I guess, but the Joker at least looks like a clown, like a jester.
But he looks like a clown just because he got his mouth slit open and then painted around it. It wasn't because he wanted to look like a clown or just decided one day I'm going to be funny.
It must be like so you're picturing like a big grinning thing. I'm picturing kind of like an egg-shaped hole.
Yeah, I'm picturing an egg-shaped hole, and if you look at someone who's laughing and looking crazy, it's kind of egg-shaped.
No, your mouth isn't egg-shaped.
Or maybe he's called the Laughing Man because he makes little 9-year-old boys giggle with delight.
Okay.
Why do you think he's a Laughing Man, Gerald? You sound all know-it-all over there.
Yeah, so I know everything. No, I like you. I think because he had a hole for a mouth, so you know, just that I sort of read no deeper into it than that. I think a very simplistic week this week.
Hey, as simplistic as it was, we still went on for 45 minutes. So it couldn't have been that simplistic. Hi. Has everybody got their stories for next week?
Yep.
Are we ready for some Bradberries?
Yeah, I can go first. I think I'm probably going to give it the highest. I'm giving it 5 Bradberries because I was entertained throughout and I laughed.
Wow, 5 from you.
Yeah.
Have you given anything 5 yet?
I gave Eminence 5.5.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I think the very first one, Story of an Hour, got 5.
I was not expecting a 5 from you. I'm kind of surprised.
I laughed a lot.
9-year-old boys are kind of funny.
Story of your life.
The Laughing Man made you laugh. Imagine that.
I had the China-New York border.
Yeah, the China-Paris border kind of killed me. Okay, Gerald, how many Bradberries are you giving it today?
Just a 3 for me. Would have been lower, but the treatment of the writing of the children's part was very, very good, I thought. But no more than that. I'm sorry.
Don't tell me sorry. I'm not JD Salinger. I mean, you know, I'm amazing and all, but I don't think I came back from the death as a black woman. Kenechi?
I'm going to give it 4. 4.
Well,
I was debating this because I put it in my Goodreads. I've been putting my short stories in my Goodreads because I am curious how many short stories I read at the end of the year. I gave it 3 on Goodreads, so I'm going to give it a 4 here because it's out of 6, right? Yeah, I'm going to give it a 4, mainly for exemplary use of language and wonderful portrayal of the children in the story, but he got knocked a couple points for not making the story stick with me. And for making me dig too far to find meaning. I don't have to work that hard.
No.
I don't mind working that hard if it's like something really complex and interesting, but to work that hard just about a story about a couple kids getting read a story just kind of made me annoying.
Very good. I can relate to that.
Okay. And last week, listeners awarded The Hasselblad by Jocelyn Johnson 3 Bradberries.
And we need more listeners coming over to the website at literaryroadhouse.com and letting us know how many Bradberries they want to give this story so we can add them up for the next week. Mm-hmm. I would love to have more listener participation. So, I'm going to put into the pot for next week The Firebird. I'm going to butcher this name. I'm so sorry, Mr. Author. The Firebird by Sakat Majumdar. It sounded so white.
Did you say so? Yeah?
That was just horrible.
Where is that from? Where is the name from?
I think it's Indian, and it's a story in the Kenyan Review. I can't believe I just totally butchered the dude's name. I'm so sorry.
My story. Oh, go on, Joe.
Oh, no, you started. Go on.
The Destructors by
Oh,
Graham
just a second. You got the story last week. You don't get a story.
Oh.
Yeah,
You have to run the
judge.
game.
Okay. Oh yeah, cool.
Trying to cheat.
Yeah.
I see what you did there.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry I gave you the mic then. My story's going classic American short story. Raymond Carver, and the story is called Cathedral.
I think I've read that. I don't remember it, but I think I've read that. Ooh, I want to read that. Anais?
Yep. Mine is The Magic Chalk by Kobo Abe. He's a Japanese philosopher who's been compared to Kafka, but described on the Wikipedia page as nightmarish. How exciting!
A nightmarish Kafka. That is kind of exciting, actually.
Kafka is nightmarish. What do you mean?
I'm the Kafka of your nightmares. So, Kenechi, what game are we going to play in order to figure out what we're going to read next week?
Okay, it's a very simple game. Geography
That's what they all
based.
say.
No, it's really simple, just geography based. And so basically, we're going to go through and turn by turn, each person's going to name a country in Africa. If you name a country that someone else has named, then
You're going to make me lose my black card, aren't you? You just can't do this to people.
Yeah, so this should be interesting. And then if by some freak of nature we manage to name all 54 countries, then we move on to capitals, but I don't think we'll get that far.
No, I don't think so.
So yeah, if you name something that someone else has already named, then you're out. And if you take too long, you're out. And the last person to name a country wins.
Okay.
And if you name a country that doesn't exist, obviously you're out as well. So.
If you name a country that's not really in Africa, you name like it.
Yes, it's a mundo.
Okay, who's gonna go first?
Okay, I'm gonna go by like the order on my screen, so it's gonna go Anais, Gerald, Maya, Anais, Gerald, Maya. Okay, cool.
Cruel.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna
Chad.
write down the names so that I keep a track of who's named what, and then yeah, if I see anything twice, then someone's out. All right, so Anais, when you're ready, just go.
Chad.
Yeah.
Algeria.
Yeah.
Ready.
Nigeria.
I would hope. Mali.
Yeah.
Morocco.
Somalia.
Liberia.
Yeah.
Libya.
Yeah.
Eritrea.
Where, sorry?
Eritrea.
Eritrea.
Yeah. However you guys pronounce it. It's the one with the yummy Nigeria. They have the food and the bread, and it's flat. And it's got the holes in it, and it's really yummy, and it comes on a big plate. And you eat too much, then you feel sick.
Sorry, the one next to where?
It's Eritrea.
Eritrea, you mean? Eritrea.
Yeah.
Okay,
I don't know how you guys pronounce it with your English accent, knowing your geography. I just pronounce it the way it sounds on paper.
All right, Anais.
Ghana.
Cool.
Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Oh, curse words. I'm sitting here trying to decide if South Africa is the name of the country or if it's just the location. I'm going to go with South Africa.
Yeah, that's a country.
Oh, thank God. I'm so
Egypt.
losing my black card.
Egypt, yeah.
Kenya.
Yeah.
I already said that one.
10 seconds left.
Said that one. Oh, God. I already said that one.
5 seconds.
Oh, but that's not in Africa. That's in Middle East. Oh, crap. I just died. The black girl is the first one out.
Too bad. It's down
so
to
wrong, Kenechi. So wrong.
That's not good. You let down the team. Anais, Gerald left. Anais?
Tanzania or Tanzania?
Yeah, Tanzania.
Tanzania. Knock a point off for bad pronunciation.
No, they invented lasagna.
Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe, yep.
Uganda.
Oh, dang it. That's the one I was thinking of.
Lesotho.
Is that a country? I think wait,
Yeah,
hold
it
on.
is. It's like in the middle
okay.
of South Africa, like an island.
Yeah. All right. Anais?
Madagascar?
Madagascar. I feel like you two are going to go the whole 54, you know.
No.
Yeah, because they're all smart and all.
I'm out.
You're out?
Yeah.
I thought Madagascar was an island.
It is an island, but it's a country as well.
But also
It's still considered Africa, even though it's in the water.
yeah.
Gerald?
No, I'm done.
Done. All right, cool.
It's
Anais,
terrible.
Alright.
we only got to 19. Less than half.
I could have kept going, y'all.
Don't judge us.
Well, I'm thinking of like movies, like Hotel Rwanda. Boom.
Oh, very good. Well done.
Yeah.
You know what?
Honestly,
I
there was,
just
like
froze.
Blood Diamond, Sierra Leone.
And the thing is, I know more countries than that. I just freaking froze. I freaked out.
I got to Uganda with The Last King of Scotland. Basically, I just thought of movies.
Well, that's one way of doing
You
it.
know what? If
Congo
your
and a
boyfriend,
Congo.
if your man ever makes our trailer video, that little bit needs to be in part of the trailer video because that was ridiculous.
Okay, so just a reminder, we're reading Nightmarish Japanese Philosopher, according to Wikipedia, Kobe Abe's The Magic Chalk. For show notes and to join the discussion, visit literaryroadhouse.com. You will also find all of our social media links on the site, and while you're at it, like our Facebook page and leave an iTunes review. It helps us a lot. Don't forget to tell your friends. Until next time, read a good story.